Welcome to another edition of Who's Better Baseball. We got a lot to discuss today. The NL MVP race starting to heat up a little bit. The playoff races across the board. A lot going on right now. But Patrick, first things first, you got to watch my Mets firsthand. What do you think? This Mets team pretty good?
Lineup is deep, that's for sure. And the bullpen's looking really solid. It helps when you have an entire line change and just bring in three new arms, right, for the final 2 months of the season. So, yeah, Mets looked solid. The starting pitching is the thing that I think could do them in, but they held their own in Denver in Coors Field. So, hats off to the New York Metropolitans.
And they moved past the Braves by winning that series against the Rockies. We will talk Mets Braves a little bit later. What I wanted to do to open up the show today is talk about the NL MVP race because Shohei Ohtani is an overwhelming favorite. You look at the odds from BetMGM, he is at minus 1,400. So very significant that everyone's sort of expecting Ohtani to end up being the MVP, and for good reason. He has 34 home runs and 32 stolen bases as the Dodgers DH this year and is leading the National League when it comes to Fangraphs wins above replacement. But Elly De La Cruz is right there. Ketel Marte is on a good run. Is he as much of a favorite as the odds would suggest? Because I don't think that the odds are necessarily right with how open I still think this NL MVP race kind of is.
I think the odds are what everyone thinks they should be. And so
Okay.
in that way, they are correct. But as we are going to dig into here in just a moment, it's a lot closer than a lot of people might think. And if you're looking at certain metrics, you can make the case that Ohtani is not the MVP. He's in the conversation, even in the most worst case scenario. Even if you can find some disparaging statistics or incredibly favorable statistics for someone like an Elly De La Cruz or Ketel Marte, who I think is probably the one you make the best case for, it still feels like this is all about Shohei Ohtani and everyone else has to figure it out. It really does seem like after you get to the trade deadline and once you get past that, it's almost a whole new season. So, hey, awesome. Nice job. You're on your way to 40-40. But what are you doing for the final 2 months of the season? Now we're 7-8 weeks away from game 162. And this is where someone like the Dodgers, if they lose their hold on the NL West, and someone like the Diamondbacks with Ketel Marte, if he leads the way, you could have somewhat of a surprising upset. But we'll dig into some of the numbers now to suggest, you know what, it's a little bit more Ketel Marte, I think, than people realize.
Yeah, Elly De La Cruz is the guy that is atop the WAR leaderboards, but to me, Ketel Marte is the clear runner-up right now, and the odds would suggest that as well. He's at plus 600. The fact that there is a chance right now, we will talk about the Dodgers and their hold on the NOS, but it's not as big of a lead as one would have thought at this stage of the season. I think that would be the slam dunk way that Ketel Marte would all of a sudden become the NL MVP if he somehow led the Diamondbacks to win the NL West. I think there'd be too much of an argument for Marte. But just looking at the stats right now, Ketel Marte is almost at 30 home runs. He's got 29. He's hitting 295, 366 on base, 553 slug, a 149 weighted runs created plus. He's only a half a win behind Ohtani when it comes to WAR, and he is leading his team as the clear-cut best player, not only from out of the playoff mix entirely, but now, like we said, into even the NL West race. So it's been a pretty crazy run for Marte and the Diamondbacks.
I want to talk about something here because this year for me, it's really seemed to have jumped out to the forefront and it's worth discussing. And a lot of fans probably might not be thinking along these lines. Fangraphs wins above replacement versus Baseball Reference wins above replacement. I think you're talking about Marte being in second there using Fangraphs, right? And I've been looking at Baseball Reference, and I think they're both important tools, right? But one is about the actual results, and one is about what the results probably should have been, and for giving you context of maybe this guy's getting a little bit unlucky, and so expect more from them, or they've been unlucky, whatever side of the coin you're on. Ketel Marte statistically is the best player in the National League when you look at baseball references, wins above replacement, that is giving credit to what the actual results are. Again, if you got lucky here or there and that ball went out of 1 out of 30 ballparks, if you got 10 unicorn home runs out of your 29, which would be almost an impossibility. But if 10 of Ketel Marte's 29 home runs were unicorns, only a home run in that one ballpark that he played in, it doesn't matter. He hit 29 home runs. We can't take that away from a player. And so Fangraphs does take that away from players, whereas Baseball Reference doesn't. So to me, when it comes to the MVP conversation, I really think it should start and end with Baseball Reference's version of WAR. And then, you know what, if you need to break a couple ties and you need to look at things, then you go over to Fangraphs. But for me, just looking at what the end results were, not what they should have been, I'm looking at Baseball Reference, and that's got Ketel Marte head and shoulders above Ketel Marte. Ketel Marte is head and shoulders above Ohtani right now.
Yeah, and that's very interesting, the difference that you find between those two. And the one thing also is I don't understand always how the defense weighs in, because like you'll have a player like Matt Chapman who has a significant difference between Baseball Reference WAR and Fangraphs WAR. Is that just because his actual results are better than the underlying ones that Fangraphs might have, or is it how they grade defense? Is it how they are which metric is Baseball Reference using compared to the one that Fangraphs is using for the defensive side of things? So I think you have to look at both of them. And Marte being half a win behind the Fangraphs and being ahead of Ohtani in Baseball Reference, that is a big notch on his ledger there to make him the MVP at this stage. Offensively, Ohtani's been the best player in the National League. But how much do we knock him for not playing in the field? How much do we credit Ketel Marte for what he's done to be not only out there leading the offense, but still being a really solid defensive second baseman? I think that's what voters are going to have to decide.
I think Ohtani deserves to get knocked severely for being a DH only. We've seen it through the history of baseball since the introduction of the designated hitter. We have not had a DH win that award, and there's been some guys who've had great cases, but they're only playing half of the game. I think oftentimes we see highlights of mostly of guys with great hits, right? And you see some wonderful defensive plays, but at the same time, that ho-hum 4-3 over to first base, someone's got to make that play. Ketel Marte is making that play for his team. Shohei Ohtani is sitting on the bench. He's got one of those massage guns going on his thighs, getting ready to try to steal 40 bases. He's not playing half of the game. And that's unfortunate, right? Because he would be out there. I'm sure it'll be interesting to see what happens in his career with the Dodgers. If we start to see him play more outfield, I think that very much could be a possibility. And he can't get credit for pitching, right, this season after having that reconstructive elbow surgery. So it's just unfortunate. But right now in 2024, if we're talking about the best player in baseball, if you're not playing defense, that is going to ding you a bit. And that's why players like Matt Chapman, as you point out, really that kind of helps push along the narrative that he deserves to be in the conversation. It's going to be hard if the Giants don't get into the postseason. But if Ketel Marte can continue to elevate the Dodgers into October and win that NL West, I mean, that right there, that's who your MVP in the National League is going to be, whoever ends up winning the NL West.
Yeah, that honestly is going to factor in pretty big way if the Dodgers aren't the team. If the Dodgers end up just finishing it out like we all expect them to, then I think it's just going to be a matter of how much have the Diamondbacks made that a race. What's Ketel Marte look like down the stretch? I do want to note here that since June, Ketel Marte has been the best player in the National League. He's hitting 328, 415 on base, 642 slug. The batting average trails only Brian Reynolds, Jackson Churio. The on-base percentage only Kyle Schwarber. The slug is better than Shohei Ohtani's, the best mark in the National League, as is his 186 WRC plus, and he has 19 home runs. So during this span since June, only one home run less than Shohei Ohtani, and he has been the best player when it comes to WAR, tied with Francisco Lindor at 3.6 wins above replacement since June.
Francisco Lindor needs to come up in this conversation too in a moment. Another thing with Marte, Ohtani, you talked about the defense kind of being critical in this conversation. How about that value of the player, right? So much is made of those seasons, Andre Dawson, Alex Rodriguez, a team finishes in last place. Steve Carlton winning a Cy Young. That's a little bit different. That's just an individual player award. But the V in MVP is value, like what you're contributing to your team. And if your team is not making the postseason, and if they're one of the worst in the game, you don't really have that much value. So you get dinged for that, rightly or wrongly, whatever it is. Shohei Ohtani has got some very talented teammates, right? Also in the top 10 for B WAR on his own team is Mookie Betts and Freddie Freeman. They're right there, just under 4. Betts, of course, has missed a lot of this season, but Freddie Freeman there all the time. Who does Ketel Marte have to lean on? Who else is pushing the Diamondbacks into the postseason and carrying them, as you said, since June? Ketel Marte has been that guy. So Jack Peterson, another DH only kind of player, and Christian Walker, who has been on the shelf for a little while. They're at 2.6 wins above replacement, according to Baseball Reference. So Ketel Marte is doing a lot of heavy lifting on his own. Shohei Ohtani, not so much.
Yeah, he is for sure. And I will shout out, since I do have the stats pulled, Eugenio Suarez, unbelievable since June as well.
Yeah,
13 home runs. He's been very strong, and that's been a big reason why this Diamondbacks lineup, along with Jock Peterson, all those guys, have really taken off. You said we're going to get to Francisco Lindor, so I'll touch on it now. From covering this guy day over day here with Locked On Mets, what I have to say is he might not win the award, but this might be his career year. And when you talk about most valuable, Francisco Lindor has been that for the New York Mets. The leadership that he has shown, the way he has brought them back in this race. And you saw in that series against the Rockies, the first 2 games were not going the Mets' way at all. And they really just couldn't score in that second game. They needed to win that to get the series even. And it was Lindor that came through with the big hit. Lindor in the third game of the series leads it off with the double, and that starts a rally. Francisco Lindor has been so good. And then it's the fact that he gives you great defense at shortstop. He really does have his fingerprints on every aspect of the game for the Mets. And so while I don't think he's going to win the award ultimately because his offensive numbers just aren't quite there with Marte and certainly not there with Ohtani, when it comes to value to a team as a leader, I would make the case, narrative-based alone, no one has been more valuable than Francisco Lindor for their team.
I think he'll finish higher in the MVP voting this year than he has to date. 2017, he was 5th in AL MVP voting, and I think it's pretty safe that he's going to be in that top 5 range. I think the thing that could hinder him is, again, Pete Alonso. He's starting to heat up 2 home runs on Thursday in Colorado. So you have both of those guys working together, working in tandem. That's great for the Mets. Hard for each individual man making their own MVP case. So he may have to start to separate himself just a little bit from Pete Alonso. That's a good problem for the Mets. Bad problem for Francisco Lindor, who, you're right, a lot of the intangibles that the New York daily beat reporters are seeing. You're right. Like as you said, the fingerprints are all over it. Their comeback, this resurgence. So Lindor definitely needs to be in this conversation.
Yeah, I think he'll end up finishing 3rd, honestly. I think it'll come down to Marte or Ohtani, and then I think Lindor will get a 3rd place finish, which would be, like you said, the highest of his career.
We're not going to see any of the pitchers really in the conversation. Hunter Green is tops right now for B WAR. Paul Skeens is number 2 in B WAR for pitchers in the National League. So good stories. These guys will get votes. We know that. But as far as like the number 1 guy, it's unless you have a historic season as a pitcher, you're not going to do it. Unless you're having a very, very, very good year, maybe just shy of historic as a pitcher, and you're boosting your team into the playoffs. Great, but that's not going to happen for the Reds. It could happen for the Pirates. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, I mean, I'd even look at Chris Sale, who's 13-3 with a 2.75, and clearly the best pitcher on the Braves. But I don't even know if the Braves are going to make the playoffs, and even if they do, I don't think that narrative alone is going to carry him to the MVP. I think the best pitchers that have their award in the Cy Young, I don't think anyone is trending towards a triple crown or something where they can win that award like a Verlander did in the past. So, I think ultimately it's going to be a long conversation between Ellie and Ohtani, which is also going to factor into the NL West race, which is where I want to go next here. The Dodgers are 2.5 games up on the Padres right now. Who would have seen that coming? That we'd be sitting here in August and it would be this wide open in that NL West. And the Diamondbacks are a game back of the Padres. So you have 3 teams within 5 games of each other right now. It really is anyone's race, even though I don't think it's ever really felt like that. But now you got to look at the standings and say, you know what? Maybe the Dodgers could actually drop and not win the NL West.
I think I said it the beginning of the year with some friends that what's more likely, the somebody else other than the Rockies finishes in 5th place, or someone other than the Dodgers finishes in 1st. And I think everyone came together and said, yeah, you know what, maybe the Giants get really, really bad and things fall apart for them. And that happens because we just couldn't have possibly seen the Dodgers scrapping like this. All right, there's 17 games over 500, but we expected them to be there in April, right? By the end of that first month of the full month of the season, they would be there. And that hasn't been the case. And they're okay. They're fine. But meanwhile, while they're just trying to get across the finish line, as you said, the Padres are there 2.5 games back. The Diamondbacks are 3.5 games back, and they're getting better and better by the day. And they're making this race incredibly interesting in the NL West, where, again, you don't win that division, you are going to have to play in the first round. Some fan bases might say, hey, that's a good thing. I don't want to be on my butts for that wild card round because that hasn't fared well for those teams getting a bye. But yeah, the Dodgers have definitely had their troubles, and it's opened the door for both the Padres and the Diamondbacks here.
The Dodgers were 52-33 at the end of June. Since then, from July on, they have gone 14-17. Not terrible, but a losing record nonetheless. I got to take a second and see what the Diamondbacks have done. I know it's been a lot better, but the point stands here. You have these 2 teams who seem to be on this rocket ship up, and that's the Diamondbacks and the Padres. Teams that got better at the deadline, particularly the Padres, but even the Diamondbacks, who are also getting healthier right now. Eduardo Rodriguez making his first start, Merrill Kelly on the way back. That's going to make them that much better. And let's not forget, the Diamondbacks were in the World Series last year. And since July, they have a 22-10 record, the best mark in Major League Baseball, second best, Padres at 18-10. So those 2 teams are hot right now. How long can they continue doing this? We'll find out, but it definitely has turned into a really exciting race in the NL West.
Both Padres and Diamondbacks 8-2 over their last 10 going into the weekend series. And you said it right there. The Diamondbacks are getting back so many players. I mean, Eugenio Suarez, not totally banged up for the first half, but now he's finally heating up. It's one of those reasons why a team like the Diamondbacks were one, I think, that a lot of us had on the radar as keep your eye on them, because while they might not make a ton of moves at the deadline, they are getting back a ton of players. You could have said the same thing about the Giants in a lot of ways. Then they go off and trade Alex Cobb, and then they trade Jorge Soler to Atlanta. So they kind of lost that luster, even though Blake Snell is starting to heat up. Nevertheless, it's just, I would take the Diamondbacks over the Padres right now. I have a little bit more confidence in them to be able to do it because, as you said, they've got that World Series in their back pocket. They know what it takes to win. Torey Lovullo has done this before, whereas you can't necessarily say the same in San Diego. And Mike Schilt, it's been a while since St. Louis, since he's been able to get that thing going. So the Diamondbacks have that better track record for success late in the year, more so than this Padres team.
I'd actually push back on that a little bit, only because we got to remember the Padres 2022, they were very close to making the World Series themselves, getting to the NLCS. And I just wonder at some point, does it all finally come together for a San Diego team that feels like they've been knocking on the door for a while? And you look at the star power on that team, you have Manny Machado starting to really do it out there. Tatis having a good season. Jackson Merrill, one of the best rookies this year. And then Xander Bogaerts is coming back, and Bogaerts being an impact player down the stretch. Then you also put together what I think right now might be the best bullpen in baseball because of the additions that they made, where they really can shorten these games. If they get 5 innings out of their starting pitcher, let's say Matt Waldron gives them 5 and comes out with the lead, you have a bullpen that can lock down these games. What's funny is I don't know if I like the Padres more in October or not. I think it's really anybody's game, and the Diamondbacks just show the ability to get hot. But I'm starting to wonder if the Padres are the team that ends up winning this division. I think that they might just be the one that can really do it down the stretch. And I'm pretty sure they have the weakest schedule remaining, if I'm not mistaken.
Of those three teams.
I think
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, they do 26th most difficult schedule. Dodgers 18th, D-backs 12. So D-backs got some harder teams on their schedule. It's funny because you bring up 2022, not that long ago, but for the San Diego Padres, that was a long time ago. That was a lot of transactions ago for AJ Preller. And of the four names you brought up, three of those four, the only one that wasn't Manny Machado, they weren't around in 2022 on this team to experience that run to the NLCS against the Phillies. So I think that hurts them a little bit. Again, there's so much talent that it's bound to kind of pull through. It's bound to finally come to fruition. And we're seeing that now. But when things are so tight as they are right now, I would tend to give it to the team that did it in 23 versus the team that did it in 22. Bottom line is it's going to be fun watching what happens with these three teams and saying, hey, someone other than the Dodgers might actually win this division. We forget about the Giants winning 107 games and doing it, because in my head, I'm like, oh, the Rockies were the last team to really put it to the Dodgers. They had to go to game 163 in 2018. Well, yeah, the Dodgers won 107 games. That was historic. That doesn't even count. Really, it was the Rockies in 2018. It's going to be fun to watch.
It's going to be a crazy race. It really is. And I think what's wild about the playoffs right now is there's so many things that we took for granted going into the year. Like, oh, the Braves are going to win the NL East and the Dodgers are going to win the NL West. And, whether it's you look and you see a Brewers team that we didn't expect to be in the race, and now they're atop it. There's just a lot of unpredictability that happens every year that you always go in and you think, oh, the same teams that made the playoffs last year are going to make it this year. We're seeing a lot of variance. And I think the fact is there is not a single race right now that is open and shut. Any team could theoretically win their division. Any of these teams that are close. Yeah, I think the Brewers might be a little bit more in command of their division than some others. The Phillies have an 8-game lead over the Mets, 8.5 game over the Braves, but they're struggling a little bit. It does feel like we're in a position where a lot is up in the air later in the season than I think it typically is.
Yeah, that's going to bode well for ratings. It's just going to further the interest along. And because you had so many teams that were in contention at the trade deadline, we're going from July 30th, hey, my team is in it, right? A majority of markets can ultimately say that to a degree, to, wow, this is one of the best races that I can remember in a long time. Not even in my division, not even in my league, for the team that I root for. So, a lot can happen in that month, right? Football season gets started, so that's going to distract people. But I think it's also going to hold a lot more attention for Major League Baseball. And again, that's a positive thing. More eyes, more people realizing how great Major League Baseball is as a sport at a time in which people are beginning to shift over to football. Don't give up on baseball yet. It's an amazing sport. It is a marathon. That's probably why it's not up for everyone. Not everyone has run a marathon in their life. But if you want to do something, you want to accomplish something in life, watch an entire baseball season. That is truly an accomplishment.
It is. It is. Watch every single game for your team. Who do you have here? If you had to pick before we move to the next topic, Dodgers, Padres, Diamondbacks, who's going to win this division?
I'll take the chalk. The Dodgers will win the NL West, but I like the Diamondbacks to go number 2 and Padres at 3.
I'll take the chalk too. Yeah, all that talk, and I think we're still on the same page that the Dodgers, they're going to find their way because it's still the Dodgers. But
you got Padres or Diamondbacks to finish in second?
I think Padres in second.
Yeah, here we go. All right.
And I do think that those two teams are going to make the playoffs. I think both of them will be the top 2 wildcard teams, which leaves us with the Mets and the Braves here. If it's going to come down to a couple of teams in that wildcard race, it might just be Mets Braves. That's what we're seeing in the standings right now. Mets move a half a game over the Braves after the Braves had a brutal series against the Milwaukee Brewers, where I believe they were outscored, I think 32-12 or something. 34-12 off the top of my head. My Locked On Mets notes from last night ringing in my head. But yeah, they got destroyed 16-7 to finish off that sweep. And at home, losing to the Brewers. Should we be concerned about this Braves team?
I think so. And I think I'll have a much better idea after this weekend. Atlanta does come to Denver for a 3-game set, not really seeing the best of their best, although Spencer Schwellenbach, who will go Friday night, has been pitching really well over his last 5-6 starts. So I'll have a much better idea come Monday morning, but the Atlanta definitely is struggling right now, and the Mets are surging. And so based on what we've been discussing here today, there might only be room for one of those teams to get in. I think of those 3 spots, it's going to be a 4-team race with the 2 that are in the NL West, but there's only room for one of them. It's going to be between Mets and Atlanta definitely is struggling right now. We're well past the Ronald Acuna Jr. and Spencer Strider being out for the year. Now the guys need to play and step up, and they just don't seem to be in lockstep right now. Austin Riley playing much better after a slow start, but just not getting contributions from everywhere in the lineup. That deep lineup where you looked at their bench at the start of the season and say, you know what? 3 or 4 of those guys would hit in the middle of most teams' lineup. They're not doing that right now. Some of them are still hurt. The rotation obviously has been banged up and have been taking a couple of hits. So there's a lot to be concerned about right now. If momentum is only as good as your next day's starting pitcher, that's all good and well. But the Mets have the momentum right now ahead of Atlanta. Atlanta does not have that momentum at all.
They don't, and you look at their lineup, and Matt Olson is the one that screams out the most, because talking about a guy last year that was in MVP finalism, he was right there, had a great season, 54 home runs, 139 driven in. This year, he's got 18 home runs and 54 RBIs, which isn't terrible. It's still solid production, but the batting average has dropped by nearly 60 points. The on-base percentage, over 80 points. The slug, nearly 200 points down. He was a 604 slug last year, 414 this year. Matt Olson has just not been the same player that we come to expect. Now, can he get hot for the final 7-8 weeks of the season and carry the Braves to playoffs? Absolutely. But the offense that was so good last year just has not been there in Atlanta. One of the stats that I talked about on my show today, you look at the OPS for all the different hitters on the Braves, only 3 guys with an OPS over 720, because Olson's at 720. You have Marcell Ozuna in the 950s. Austin Riley just got over 800. And Travis d'Arnaud's in the high 700s. So those are the only 3 guys that are having good offensive seasons altogether. And the rest of the team is struggling. The Mets, on the other hand, they have 9 guys with an OPS over 720. Just a much better collective team effort for the Mets offensively.
Matt Olson is a guy that's needs to do a lot more for his team. So does Ozzy Albies.
He's hurt though. He's hurt.
Sure, but when he was on the field,
Oh yeah,
that's been one of the problems, right? Is as we've been saying, like the injuries have been a problem, and then even when guys have been on the field, and of course you have to take it with a grain of salt, right? Because you're saying, well, if they're playing through injuries, they're just not getting that contribution. So if these guys, when healthy, like Ozzy Albies, they're playing their best, the best version of their self is going forward, you're fine. You're going to be okay. But when they've been on the field, they haven't been that great. So that's been part of the struggle that I know Atlanta and Brian Snitker have been dealing with. And they are a team that if they can just get into the postseason, they can kind of figure out a couple of those things. But this year is definitely taught us a lot about the slog that is the 162 game slate, because there are no foregone conclusions. You still have to win in the regular season, and you can't just put together a postseason type squad, which I think maybe, that's something that could be the takeaway for the season when everything's all said and done, and the chips fall where they do. And when the season's over, we'll go back and look and say, maybe that was one of the bigger mistakes that Atlanta and Los Angeles, that they made, is that they had too many really good players. That sounds strange to say, right? But you put all of your eggs in one basket, and maybe you needed to have a little bit more depth in AAA or in AA to come up in the second half of the season, because you need the entire 40-man roster. You need actually much more than that. And so if you've got a 26-man roster that's better than everybody else, head and shoulders, that's great. But those final 14 guys on the 40-man roster, you need them. And I think that's where we're seeing teams like the Padres and the Diamondbacks and the Mets really make up ground on teams like the Dodgers and Atlanta this season.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because the Mets, They absolutely did focus on depth. That was one of David Stern's big things this offseason. They traded for Tyrone Taylor. So that was sort of their fourth outfielder. And you still had Marte and Nimmo. All right, they might be okay in the outfield. And then they signed Harrison Bader. And at the time, it was like, man, Taylor and Bader, it seems like two guys with similar skill sets, defensive first outfielders. They've been huge to have both of those guys, because when Marte goes down, you have another option. Tyrone Taylor, he might not be the best offensive player, but he's a great defender. He can play right, he can play center, and that's really helped them. The Braves last year, if you look at games played, they had Acuna 159, Olsen 162, Riley 159, Albies 148, Michael Harris 138, Marcelo Zuna 144, Orlando Arcia 130. All their guys were just everyday players. And this year, I remember looking at their bench on opening day and thinking, man, like, okay, that's, Louis Guillorme is going to make the team, and who else is on this roster? Like, okay, like they're a little bit thin on the bench. Like you said, some injuries happen. Michael Harris seen an extended time on the IL. Acuna out for the year. Now Albies with a fractured wrist for a couple months. It's a lot to overcome down the stretch. They're going to need Olsen to step up. They're going to need Riley to keep doing what he has lately. And then now all of a sudden, Whit Merrifield comes into the fold to be their starting second baseman in place of Albies. He's massive for them, and he got cut from the Phillies for a reason. So a lot needs to turn around quickly for the Braves, and not to mention Jorge Soler. I guess he's a right fielder again. That's the whole other thing. To get that bat in the lineup, they're definitely sacrificing on defense. So those questions are pretty loud right now. There's a lot going on.
Because of that 2023, I think Atlanta was lulled into a false sense of comfort that these guys were just going to go out and post for a majority of 162. Now, for the Colorado Rockies, the thing that their front office has been saying for a while is that we just need to play better. And that if all of our guys, and this is the subtext, is if all of our guys are healthy and are playing 145 games, they're not missing the IL, they're having the career years that we think they still have left in them, we can be a postseason contender. And they're absolutely right. But that is not how you operate a team. That is not how you front office in the front office. You have to have depth, because those players are not going to be healthy. And the Rockies have been caught out there the last 2 years. That's why they're going to have back-to-back 100-loss seasons, is because they had nobody in AAA to step up like the Mets did with Tyrone Taylor. And teams, you need to have that depth. And the Rockies have not had that. And Atlanta, I think, is getting caught out there right now. Again, it's a much more extreme circumstance, but even still, the lack of bodies that you can call up from Gwinnett and down in AAA is really one of the biggest contributors for why they're not in first place in the NL East. They might be out of the postseason this year. Like, that's the thing is we're so used to saying, yeah, they're going to win the division. And then they lost that. And, we focused on that a little bit here on Who's Better Baseball, of course, with the Phillies in Atlanta. But now they might be out of the entire postseason because they put all their eggs in that one basket. They were fantastic, beautiful, gigantic ostrich eggs. But you can't operate your farm in that way with the one basket, all egg scenario. And that's what Atlanta did. And that's why they got a lot of cracked eggs right now. This is a master class right here on I don't know what, but this is good stuff. Can you clip this? Send this to me. This is going on my highlight reel.
Yeah, for sure. I was not expecting to talk about ostrich eggs today, but here we are.
I love metaphors, so you got to lean into it. You got to lean into it.
No, I'm good with it for sure. I think the other thing that we look at with this Braves team, they've been carried by their pitching to stay in the race as much as they have, because the offense hasn't been there. And now Ronaldo Lopez hits the IL with forearm tightness. So you have a guy who is going through a massive jump in innings as he went from reliever to a starting pitcher. He does have more of a track record than your Garrett Crochet's, than your Jordan Hickses of actually doing it as a big league starter in the past. But still, you got to be worried about it. Chris Sale, you wonder, he's over 127 innings pitched. Haven't seen that from him in a long time. How is he going to hold up down the stretch? Has a chance to pitch for a Cy Young. Max Fried, there's some questions there. Charlie Morton looks like he's on his way out all of a sudden. So I think that the Braves, it's so easy to just say, oh yeah, they're going to figure it out. And they might. They easily can have a hot September. Harris comes back, Lopez comes back, and they end up being fine. But I'm looking at so many different holes. I'm just wondering, are they really going to be able to patch these and get into this race, or could the Braves even fall out of this thing further where like the Cardinals end up better than them this year too?
I think earlier in the season, it was something that we could almost flippantly say they'll figure it out because it wasn't too complicated. It was complicated. It's like certain television shows you watch and go, man, how are they going to get out of this? It's complicated, but they've got it under control and it gets sorted out. But then once it starts getting too complicated, for anyone that's ever watched the television series Lost, it gets to a point where you go, we don't even know what we're doing here at the end, and we're just kind of making it up as we go along. We can't figure this thing out now because so much has been thrown at us. Atlanta's kind of in that spot right now. I think the Dodgers are in a spot where they can still figure it out. It's not too complex. You can go back and watch for those Easter eggs in season 1 and 2 and go, okay, it's under control, but a lot has been thrown Atlanta's way, and I don't know if they're going to figure it out.
Yeah, lost. A nice one word to describe the Braves right now too. Good stuff. Let's. We're also talking Easter eggs. Are they ostrich-sized Easter eggs? I mean, you never know with the Dodgers. I mean, big indications on how well they can play down the stretch. When it comes to the Mets, I think there are questions too. I don't think it's a slam dunk case that if the Braves don't make it, the Mets definitely will. They have their questions in the starting rotation. They have some questions in the bullpen. I just think that this lineup is good enough that they're going to be able to answer those questions with the bats and find their way in the playoffs. Not to mention, Sean Manaea has actually suddenly turned into a great pitcher. So I'm very interested to see how this shakes out, but I like the Mets' chances right now to make it out of this playoff race.
Every year there's a team that is comprised of a ton of veterans that you say, hey, you know what? There's some names there that they were good 2 years ago. This guy was good 3 years ago. I hit a good second half last year. And in theory, it looks good on paper. And it almost never comes to fruition, it seems like. But in the Mets case, it absolutely is. And they just have this deep lineup, 1 through 9, and a good bench. And so they can mix and match in a fantastic way. I think McNeil had a couple of days off, obviously, against left-handers. But they just have a solid squad of veterans that can help out a first-year manager kind of work through stuff like this. And Francisco Lindor, as you said, behind the scenes, his fingerprints all over this 2024 New York Mets squad, is saying, hey, this feels a lot like 2016. We went to the World Series. We were on a run. We were 1 inning away from winning it all. And I know what it takes to get us there. Follow my lead, hitch your trains to my caboose, and we're going to get rocking. I like the Mets here over Atlanta, and I'm shocked to say that.
You did it again, Patrick. 2015, not 2016.
What? I did not. I saw you smile and I go, no. I got this one.
Yep.
No, I did say it right. 2016. I'm referring to the Cleveland Guardians. 2016.
There you go. Okay.
That's what I was saying.
Okay.
I got it.
I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the Mets in 2015.
No.
Okay.
Oh, we're flipped. Now you've got it. I think you've caught it.
Maybe I have.
2015, 16 World
I guess
Series.
Listening, not my strong suit. Yeah, no, I definitely think that we're seeing this Mets team come together at the right time, and Lindor being a huge part of it. All the different guys that they have. You're going to get Starling Marte back potentially next week as well, so that just adds another guy on their bench. Huge. You talk about the difference between the depth. The Mets are going to probably have 2 or 3 guys on the bench on a given day with Jesse Winker, Marte, McNeil might not be in the lineup. They're going to have an embarrassment of riches down the stretch to be able to mix and match. You're not going to see the same lineup every day for the Mets. We saw it in that series against the Rockies, 3 different lineups. That's going to keep happening as they cycle guys in and out and try to stay fresh for the stretch run. Let's move over to the American League. Spent a lot of time in the National League today, and there is a race in the AL West that isn't maybe as good as the one in the NL West. The teams might not be quite where those National League West teams are, but it's a very tight race all the same. And it's the Mariners and the Astros. The Mariners were sitting in a great position not that long ago. I believe it was like June 18th where they were sitting. I had the stat pulled the other day, I think, for the power rankings, but they were like 13 games over or something like that. And now they're only a couple games over 500. The Astros have battled all the way back to take this division, and they're now just neck and neck. Who you got down the stretch here? Astros, Mariners.
I said it in the beginning of the season when the Astros were absolute dog crap. And I got to say it now. I'm taking the Houston Astros here just because they've been there before. And I don't mean there as in the World Series or there as in October, but there at the end of game 162, the regular season is over. The Astros are there, and the Mariners just don't have that same track record. You mentioned the fact that in June they had, such a significant lead and were playing great baseball, and they still are playing, pretty well, but they didn't have that team breathing down their neck, right? They had the Rangers with a ton of injuries. They had the Angels still trying to pretend like they were relevant. They had the Oakland, Las Vegas, Sacramento, Vancouver Athletics, Bally's Sportsbook, whatever they want to call themselves, they were out of the hunt. And so it was pretty easy and convenient for them to kind of not feel any pressure of being in first place because they were just cruising along. And now all of a sudden, Astros passed them by just a little bit. And that kind of changed some things. And it was nice to see Jerry DiPoto being a little bit more aggressive, going out, getting a veteran bat that, wasn't too expensive in a Justin Turner, making a much bigger splash for Randy Arozarena. That being said, the Mariners are only 4-4 since that day on July 30th. So haven't gotten that boost, haven't felt it just yet. Astros also 4-4 since the big Joey Loperfido trade. Is that what we're calling it? Or Yossi Kikuchi, I guess. But
yeah, I think this year is the Kikuchi trade, but it'll turn into the Joey Loperfido trade. It's crazy that the Mariners were in such a big lead and yet they didn't do enough. During that part of the season early on, they had a chance to really create even more separation than they did, and they never quite put the Astros away, so to speak. And now Houston has battled back. We saw the Rangers last year falter down the stretch, trying to close out Houston, and they were able to win that division. Feels very similar with a different team this year, where the Mariners have the better team, I think. And you know what? Maybe it ends up working out for them. Maybe they could both make the playoffs. Although the wild card race seems like a harder path to make the playoffs than winning the AL West right now. Maybe if the Mariners made it, it would be like the Rangers, and they would be the hotter team come October. But winning the marathon, as you said, that is something that takes experience, and the Astros have it. So it again, on paper, I think the Mariners have a better team, but I don't know if I'd bet against the Astros either.
yeah, both those teams neck and neck atop the AL West with the Astros. I don't know if you want to say technically a half a game. Like they have like 1 percentage point better
Yeah.
because of how the games, but basically the same record. And then if you don't win that division, both of those teams are essentially 4 games back of the wild card. So you're right. You have to go out and win this division. And once that pressure is there, I mean, again, who has wilted under the lights? We've seen Seattle do that. We've not seen the Astros do it to that same extent. They shine under pressure, right? No matter how much noise you're making, whether you're banging on drums, whether they're banging on drums, it doesn't necessarily matter. Or rather, garbage cans. They're going to be there. So my confidence is still in Houston with a new manager and Joe Espada. I just think that they've got the pieces that are there. They've got the experience to figure this thing out. They're still not even getting the best from Kyle Tucker as you were the first part of the season. It seems like Tucker's goes great. The team's not playing well. Team starts to play better. You're not really getting much from Kyle Tucker. So hopefully they can get on the same page. But when it comes to Mariners, Astros, I really still have to lean heavily, probably more than any of the other conversations we've had today. I like Astros over Mariners.
What's crazy about that is you look at the starting rotation. I can't stress this enough for the Mariners. They have the best rotation in baseball. I guess the Phillies this year have been up there too, but you look at the innings leaders in the American League. Of the top 7, the Mariners have 3. Logan Gilbert, Luis Castillo, and George Kirby, all over 140 innings pitched. These guys take the ball every 5th day. They give you a chance to win. If the Mariners just average 4.5 runs a game down the stretch, they're probably going to win this division. So that lineup has to figure something out. Now, they're without J-Rod right now. They're without J.P. Crawford. If those guys come back, Randy Arozarena gets hot, I still do see a pathway for the Mariners to win this division. Obviously, it's right in front of them, both teams tied. I want to see the Mariners win this division. How about that? I can't say that I believe it because I just can't count on this lineup, but I want to see Seattle do their pitching right, put up the runs necessary, and end up winning this division because I think they're a team that I want to watch in October more. I want to see that rotation in a short series and see what they can do. But they got to step up. They got a couple months to do it here.
I don't know if there's a single category that the general population would want to see Houston make the postseason over Seattle, right? New blood, something fresh, a different splash of color, no more orange. That's positive, I think, for most baseball fans. The city of Seattle, getting that dome open at T-Mobile Park, like just beautiful, like the city of Seattle. Yeah, they deserve to have that. Houston, they've had enough. And again, just the history of those teams. It's fun when Seattle's there. It's evocative of Ken Griffey Jr., evocative of Ichiro Suzuki. Houston, you've been around enough. You're not providing anything new and exciting anymore. So I think a lot of people feel the same way, that it would be more exciting. And then, yes, the rotation, way better in Seattle. That was an absolute pleasure. That was one of the most fun assignments I had this offseason was, all right, preview the top 10 pitchers in the AL West. And it was, I hope people don't think I'm a Mariners fan, because like 3 of the top 4, top 5 are going to be Mariners. They have to be. It's just figuring out what the order is. I think everyone's got Luis Castillo as the ace, but I'm a huge George Kirby fan. He's fantastic. Meanwhile, Logan Gilbert was their all-star. So they've got 3 dudes right there where if they can get into the postseason, they can be very dangerous. They just have to get into the postseason first.
They got to get there, and they got to win that division, it seems like. When is the last time the Mariners won their division? Do you know?
2001.
There you go. I thought you would get that one right. 2001, when they won 116 games. Since then, have never won that division. So this is the year. It's right there for them. They just got to edge out the Astros down the stretch. They have the team to do it. I will stand by the fact that I think on paper they have the better team, because I really don't trust that Astros pitching. I've been pretty consistent on that. And it looks like I'll have egg on my face when it's all said and done. But we will see if the Mariners can hold off the Houston Astros. Our last topic of the day is the topic. Gunnar versus Bobby Witt. We got to do our check-in. And since we talked about it last, Bobby Witt Jr., maybe just the best player in baseball. He has been insanely good. He nearly hit 500 in the month of July. I mean, what can we say about Bobby Witt Jr.? I feel like he's better right now.
We started the season talking about Bobby versus Gunnar, and we were a little bit split. It seemed like, okay, Bobby Witt Jr. might have a little bit of an edge. And then Gunnar Henderson went out, was on a 50-homer pace. He's in the home run derby. The Orioles are ascending to the top of the American League. It was all about Gunnar. And we kind of waited both in the weeds, maybe me more so. I was more of a Bobby baseball guy, just waiting in the weeds going, okay, you know what? We'll give the crown to Gunnar. But a lot has changed since the start of July. In fact, Gunnar was pretty quiet in June in general. But to put this another way, yesterday at the ballpark, talking with some players, day games are always nice. It's a little bit more relaxed. It's cooler in the morning, and standing around talking, there was a lull in the conversation, and I had a player go up to me, point to the scoreboard, Bobby Witt, huh? Like he wanted to talk with me about Bobby Witt. He trains with Bobby Witt Jr. in the off season. And so, he's amazing. We got this guy, this guy, this guy, this guy, and we can't keep up with him. And he's talked about all speedsters, guys with 30 stolen base on their track record or potential. And just couldn't say enough glowing words about how phenomenal Bobby Witt Jr. is. And we've seen it. July American League Player of the Month, hit 485, has been really consistent. That's the other piece too. You go back and look, he's not had a bad month. He's had okay months. Like June, he was just okay. And when I say okay, he was hitting like 305 for the month and had 3 home runs. So on the lower side. But in general, Bobby Witt Jr. has been incredibly consistent this entire year.
He's got an average over 300 in every single month, and on base percentage over 350 in every month, a WRC plus over 130 in every month, and a WRC plus of 270 in July. That's what happens when you hit 49, 520, 833. Basically, if you're not aware what WRC plus is, it's weighted runs created plus, measuring a hitter based on a league average of 100. So Bobby Witt Jr. in July was 170% better than your league average hitter. The craziest part about his season is these home road splits. We got to mention it. Bobby Witt Jr. is Ted Williams when he's playing in Kauffman. He's got a 409 batting average this year at Kauffman Stadium. I don't think they're banging on trash cans. And you look at the team, it's really just Bobby that has these ridiculous splits. For whatever it's worth, maybe it's trying to prove that contract. He wants to show the fans what he's all about, and his numbers are just ridiculous playing at home this season.
I have not heard or seen numbers like that at Kauffman Stadium since Bob Hamlin. I think he was the 92 American League Rookie of the Year award winner. It was just one of the most obscure guys. I would say George Brett, but George Brett would hit for more average. Remember when I was banging the drum? We're saying that a lot. Eggs, drums, banging things. A lot of that stuff going on in this episode about how when we have conversations about the end of the season and what a player's performance is, Baseball Reference's version of WAR is the performance, and Fangraphs is probably what it should have been. So it's a little more theoretical. That being said, according to Baseball Reference, 7.5 WAR for Bobby Witt Jr., 6.8 for Gunnar, so a little less than 1. You know what? I love Fangraphs' version of WAR. Bobby Witt Jr., 8.1 F-WAR. Gunnar, only 6.1. So he's got a full 2.0 wins above replacement. I'm back on the Fangraphs train.
Yep. You just gotta mold the narratives however they suit you best. So I'm right there with you. I can't get over looking at Bobby Witt Jr.'s stats. Like, I'm having so much fun just reading through these. Here's one that just jumped out to me. Extra base hits at home. He's got 45 extra base hits in 61 games. He has 25 doubles and 8 triples at Kauffman this year with 12 home runs. It's just insane. I think one thing that doesn't have any bearing on the season, but seeing the way that Bobby Witt performed in the home run derby compared to Gunnar Henderson, it just shows you the degree that Bobby Witt's locked in right now. Nearly won the thing, and he's not even a guy that is known first for his bat. I would say for his power. He's known for his bat, but I think you look at Bobby Witt's game, you think of the speed, you think of the defense, you think of the average. You don't necessarily think of the power first, and yet he thrived on that stage. So I think this is just the year of Bobby Witt really showing that he is a perennial MVP candidate, and he might push Judge. He might push Judge a little bit in that race, even though I think everyone still expects it to be Aaron Judge that ultimately wins it.
Yeah, it's either going to take Witt leading the Royals to the postseason, which is a very tall order, or the tall order himself, Aaron Judge. That's a great nickname. Is that official? Can I say that? He's the tall order? That sounds good.
Yeah.
Or the tall order just getting hurt and really not hitting those milestones we kind of expecting, out of him. He deserves a lot more recognition. Bobby Witt Jr. does. Look at defense. Here's the other piece too. Using outs above average for Baseball Savant, Bobby Witt Jr. tops among all shortstops, plus 16. Where's Gunnar at? -1. So again, doing it on both sides of the ball, not just hitting home runs, not just hitting extra bases, not just performing at home, but also playing defense, hitting on the road, being consistent. I think that's something that I think it's appreciated by those inside the game, but those outside, you're just, again, looking at the numbers going, hey, this guy has posted some really good stats, but when is he posting those stats? I kind of got that thought yesterday in the Mets-Rockies game where there was a base hit, RBI, late, didn't matter. The game was already like 8-1. And I go, yeah, this feels like the right time for so-and-so to tack on another RBI, kind of maybe the Alex Rodriguez of their generation. I'll leave it to your imagination as who that could be. But being just consistent and being good when you have to be good and being good when you don't have to be good can be taken for granted. Bobby Witt Jr. is good in all scenarios.
He is, and the team performance matters to it as well as the MVP race. I think right now, Bobby Witt Jr. for this season has maybe ended the conversation between him and Gunnar. I think he's the better guy for this year. There's going to be a lot of other conversations to be had. I think the MVP race is one we'll talk about in a couple months, and I'm looking at Judge's numbers: 456 on base, 691 slug, 41 home runs already. He's probably going to win it, but I think the conversation we'll have this offseason where Bobby Witt could be at the top of the list, is best shortstop in baseball. And that's right there for him. So we might be looking at our top 10 rankings going into 2025 and seeing Bobby Witt as the number one shortstop in the game.
We haven't seen 100 extra base hits in a single season since, I believe it was Todd Helton, who was the only player to go back-to-back in 100 extra base hits in consecutive seasons. I don't know that Bobby Witt Jr. is going to get there. He's got 65 right now, so he trails by 2, both Judge and Ohtani. But again, talk about that consistency. Could he do that much over the final 8 weeks or so? It's not out of the expectation, but that could be a conversation, maybe more for next year, perhaps, is will we ever see 100 extra base hits again in a season? If so, you got to like the gap power of Bobby Witt Jr., the raw strength of Bobby Witt Jr., and the speed of Bobby Witt Jr. to get those triples, to add them up, and to get 100 extra base hits. He's a remarkable player, and I feel good. I'm not going to take a victory lap just yet because, look, it's not over, but Bobby Witt Jr. is better. I feel like I put my eggs in the right basket.
Your ostrich eggs, if you were.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah. We're going eggs puns now.
By the way, you said breaking an egg earlier and you didn't realize it, and that's why I was laughing.
Yeah, did not intend to do that. Last thing I have, Todd Helton, 100 extra base hits. What do you have, like 80 doubles? How many doubles did Todd Helton have when he did that? Do you know?
No, I mean it might have been in the 50s, but he was good for 40 home runs.
Okay.
Coors Field produces more triples than any ballpark. Only had a few in that category, but he was a doubles hitting machine, and that power took off a little bit depending on where he was playing. Yeah, actually, Todd Helton was, you could technically say, the last guy with 100 extra base hits because he had 105 in 2001. But Sammy Sosa was also over 100. So was Luis Gonzalez. So was Barry Bonds in that 2001 season. So
what was the breakdown there of his extra base hits?
He had 49 homers, 2 triples, and 54 doubles. And the previous year, he had 59 doubles.
I did not realize he had a 49 home run season. That guy should
be
in the
Hall of Famer, Ryan. Put some respect on that man's name, okay?
I know he was great. I just didn't realize he had 50 home run power. I'm sorry. I didn't remember that. I remember him being like 30 home runs and like 50 doubles. So
Mets fans still probably think that Benny Agbayani had a better career than Todd Helton. Okay, so
well, I mean, when it comes to names, try to do better than Benny Agbayani. I mean,
did you know Butch Husky played with the Rockies?
I did not know that.
Very short time span. I actually saw a guy last year at opening day with a Butch Husky jersey. He wore number 35. That's why I'll know his number is 35 with the Rockies, because he got it on his 35th birthday. He just said, whoever's 35, that's what I'll get. And so he had this awesome throwback gray pinstripes, which is out of rotation, Butch Husky Rockies jersey. I have a photograph. I can send it to you.
That's why people come to Who's Better Baseball, for the Butch Husky references. That's where we close the show today.
Oh.
Thank you all for tuning in. We'll be back next week for another edition of Who's Better Baseball. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of these smaller videos, the shorts on our show. Find us wherever you get your podcasts, Who's Better Baseball, and then on Twitter at Who's Better BB. We'll have another stream for you next week as this playoff race continues.